Okay, I've been given the thumbs up. It's time to begin. Good to see everybody this morning. Appreciate you being here. Those of you who are joining us, I feel like an elder. You know, when you try to get people to come forward, they don't do it. Nobody pays attention. You know. Why are you even coming? You know what I mean? Hey, Bobby, can you shut that door for me, please? Yo, Bobby. Okay, now that I have everybody's attention, good morning. Good to see everybody talking and greeting and laughing. We need a lot of that during this time, don't we? Glad you're here today on the Lord's Day. We are going to engage again in looking at the book of Mark this morning. This section it'll probably take us a couple of weeks to fully cover this section, or not. Maybe I get through with it. I don't know. But I don't want to rush through it because it is pivotal, I think, in the Gospel of Mark. You could probably break Mark into three main acts if we were to look at it as a drama of sorts, dramatic production. Act 1 is what we have already covered, which is presenting the authority and the power of Jesus, but in contrast to that is showing how, despite his power and authority, he is being rejected by people that ought to receive him. And the reason is because there's a presumed or presupposition about ideology, theology, as to who the Messiah is, his characteristics, what he would do, how would he lead. And so that tension in Act 1 is pivotal. And Mark, I think, as you read it, he intends for the reader to contemplate that. Why? And so we come to chapter 4, and we have the parables. And there's a collection of those things there that illustrate the reasons why people are not receiving Jesus. It has to do with the condition of their heart, whether they are receptive or whether they are hardened in heart and refuse to believe. And then you have somewhat of a climactic event in Mark chapter 5, when Jesus does battle with the legion, which in Mark, I think, is looking at the audience, his primary audience, somewhat in the shadow of Roman strength, Roman philosophy, and all those things that Rome would define as being powerful, and everything that would represent their strength is cut down. Jesus, he's like takes the carpet from under their feet, and legion falls. So we have that climactic event of Jesus' power against the greatest power known to human beings at that time, and legion is very subservient to the power of Jesus and who he is. But then you come into some more controversy with the Pharisees, and despite his miracles and all the signs and wonders that he has done, it never, signs and wonders and various miracles are caused to create awe in people, to point people to a certain thing. I mean, a miracle being a sign, it's not the miracle itself, it's what it points to. And all of those things, God is working, and Jesus and the Spirit's working in him to perform these signs that point to the validity and the authenticity of who he is. And yet, not only do the signs not impact them, okay, they're not in awe. That is, the Pharisees, the religious leaders. Their hearts are so hardened that they are threatened and their status among Israel is at stake, because the people, general people, seem to be gravitating some to Jesus, and lots of good things are happening to the surrounding areas wherever Jesus goes. There's a summary of his activity. Never have we seen anyone speak like this and do the things that he does. He does all things well, And so when that confession is made by the populace, those who should be more in tune with Old Testament and the law and the prophets and all that, they're just as blind as a bat. They don't get any of it. So you have that first act in which there's a lot of misunderstanding. Now, the end of this Act 1 that we talked about last time is setting the stage for the failure of the apostles and disciples of Jesus, who have been with him, who have also seen the things that the religious leaders have done, but their presuppositions, their assumptions have, I guess, filtered out what Jesus is teaching them and showing them. And so he gets very frustrated with the lack of faith they have, with their lack of understanding. He gets irritated by them. And it shows in Mark, the real emotion of Jesus of being somewhat, you guys have been with me, and how come you haven't made any growth yet? Don't you remember what I did with the 5,000? Do you not recall what happened with the 4,000? And yet you are still blind. So we have this closing statement, this summary of the 12 in chapter 8, verse 21. After all that Jesus has done, and he has reminded them, he says, "Do you not yet understand?" Act 1 closes. Okay? So if we were looking at a drama or whatever, the curtain stops there, and that's the question. Do you yet not understand? And that's the issue. So it's ironic to me that those who are closest to Jesus are in the same camp, in a sense, with all the others who have a distortion of who he is and what he should do. Okay? So now we enter into the second act. Now, you have to understand, of course, I know you know this, but sometimes we don't think about it. We say we know it, but we still allow the division of chapter and verses to navigate us or to structure things for us. And remember that the chapters and the verses are not inspired. That is the numbering. Okay? Sometimes they're arbitrary, and they can disrupt if we read the Bible. Let's say you take a chapter a day. Well, that's fine, but sometimes you need to read into the other chapter to complete that particular episode. But we are so ingrained to think that we have chapter 1, verse 1, and then it ends at this verse, and that completes that section. Then you go to chapter 2, it's a whole different section. That's not at all how the Bible is written. The chapter and verses are designations for reference that were put there, not by inspiration, but later on. So I think the structure of the books of the Bible and stuff like that are sometimes they're veiled because of the chapter and verse divisions. So one of the things I'm trying to do is get you to see, I think, the structure as it is in the text. And this one, I think, pretty clearly ends in 8 and verse 21. Now, why is that? Well, verse 22 begins a new section that is followed later. If you look on your outline sheet, you have the healing of a blind man in 2 stages. And then at the bottom of the sheet, in chapter 10, verses 46 through 52, you have another sight miracle. A man named Bartimaeus is healed of his blindness. Okay? These two blind miracles, sight miracles, are like bookends to Act 2. Okay? And as you'll see in a moment, this section is structured tightly in how it's presenting its material. Okay? And that's what I wanted to illustrate here. If you look at the first cycle that I have, the second cycle, third cycle, this is where Jesus gets to the reorientation of what his mission is and attempts to show the contrast between what the apostles are doing and how Jesus is reorienting them. Okay? So it's the middle section. In fact, I think in Mark chapter 10, if you'll look there for just a second. Look at verse 45. This is, in my judgment, it doesn't mean that I'm right in any way, but in light of the theme of Mark and how it's structured, this seems to be the key verse in the Gospel of Mark. And it's, "For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life a ransom for many." So the teaching stops there, and then we go into the next sight miracle. Okay? So in the structure of the book, the way the writer by inspiration is presenting, there's a somewhat of a cliffhanger in a sense. You have the cliffhanger in Act 1. It says, "Do you not yet understand?" And then there's this other cliffhanger that Jesus emphatically states his purpose. And then we go to Act 3, and that's illustrated by the rejection and crucifixion and the resurrection. Okay? So, I wanted you to see those 3 major sections. Okay? Now, we're not looking verse to verse. I'm wanting you to see the aerial view of how Mark is presenting who Jesus is. So, let's look at the first miracle. And this is unique to the Gospel of Mark. One of the interesting things in studying the Gospels is to find what similarities they have, okay? But often, the theme or the emphasis in a gospel has to do with what they either exclude or what they add, okay? You have to ask yourself, well, if Luke records this event this way, and if Mark records this event this way, and Matthew has it, but Matthew adds this particular thing, or he doesn't have that particular thing that the other two have, then it's not like Matthew is making a mistake or there's something wrong with Matthew. It has to do with the author's selection through inspiration, that which is supporting their presentation, how they want to craft. This is, to me, one of the most exciting things about inspiration, that God is allowing the individual writers, as the Spirit moves them along. That doesn't mean that it's dictated to them and dropped in their lap. God is allowing them and moving them to present Jesus to certain audiences. And they're picking and choosing, and they're using their grammar, their language. And so that, to me, is quite fascinating when you talk about the inspiration, infallibility, and inerrancy of the Bible. Some would say there's errors in regard to these Gospels because of variance between them and things of that nature. And there's not. It's the author's presentation of who Jesus is. Why? That's the wrong question to contemplate, or wrong argument. The thing to me is, why is the author doing this? What's the intention that he has? Why is he excluding or including or adding, certain things to events? So that's sort of what we're looking at in an aerial view to see Mark's, as he charts along, showing us and revealing who Jesus really is. So Mark chapter 8, beginning in verse 22. And they came to Bethsaida, and they brought a blind man to Jesus and implored him to touch him. Taking the blind man by the hand, he brought him out to the village. And after spitting on his eyes and laying his hand on him, he asked him, "Do you see anything?" Now, this is to be read in light of the previous verse. They do not yet understand. And in this miracle, do you see anything? And he looked up and he said, "I see men, for I see them like trees walking around." Well, what does that mean? Just from the miracle, did Jesus fail? I mean, he didn't have enough power to heal him. So you got to think, why is this miracle going to be done in 2 stages? So he asked the man, "What do you see?" He says, "I see people. They're walking around. It's like you see the shadows, and they're like trees. You don't see the form. They're just like, they're moving around." So what are we to gather from that? On the part of the blind man, how would you describe what he's seeing? Yeah, a shadow of things. It's certainly not in focus, is it? Okay, let me ask you something. Yes? Yeah. That's funny. I saw him, come through the door, and I thought it was going to be a technical issue. And I was going, "What? You mean I'm going to have to redo it?" And he had a question. So, Ross, thanks, man. I appreciate it, man. I'm glad to have you in the class. Now you can go back in your room. No, I'm just playing. So, you see these people as if they're trees. Now think about someone who understands a little but not all. Okay, think of the disciples. The disciples are almost like seeing things as trees walking around. They have some amount of understanding, but Jesus says, "Do you yet not understand?" Okay, so then the guy says, "I just see people walking around as trees." And he says, then again, he laid his hands on his eyes, and he looked intently and was restored and began to see everything, what? Clearly, everything clearly. And he went to him to his home saying, "Do not even enter the village," so and so. So I want to focus on that sight miracle done in 2 stages, which is odd. And it's only in Mark. And you have to assume, I think, that it's strategically placed. That's not to say it didn't happen that way, but I'm saying Mark is choosing and picking events in the life of Christ, things that he's witnessed, things that he knows, and he's putting them together, and this is going to set the stage for the apostles when they come out of the center part are going to start seeing things what? Clearly. So is the reader of Mark's gospel. So, and when we enter into this center section, you're going to see Jesus teaches and says what's going to happen. I mean, there's no veiled meaning. He's not ambiguous. It's just straight up. This is what's going to happen, and the apostles are going. They're involved in other things. They rebuke him, and they're trying to judge who's going to be the greatest in the kingdom, sit on his left and right hand, and all this they do, and Jesus then rebukes them, and he makes an emphatic statement. Okay, and so it's a lot of effort in this center section, Act 2, to get that which is in the heads of the apostles that's hindering their understanding out of them. So look at the cycles here, and it's fascinating that it is structured in these around these three recurring themes that we see. We have Jesus will reveal his purpose. The disciples fail to understand, and then Jesus will teach something that's based upon reorienting them about what it is in the kingdom and who he is. Then you have another second cycle that occurs. Jesus reveals his purpose. The disciples fail to understand Jesus, and Jesus teaches about discipleship. And then it happens a third time, the same order. Jesus reveals his purpose, the disciples fail to understand him, and Jesus teaches about discipleship. These things occur in triplets in the middle section. 1, 2, 3. Now, that's looking from the aerial version, the aerial view of seeing how things are structured. So that's what I want to look at in this middle section, what Jesus is attempting to do to reorient his disciples to his way of thinking. And he has a difficult time doing it. In fact, in Mark, it's almost as if they fail altogether. So, and the question is, I think, in Mark is, will we be like them? Will we fail altogether? So, let's look at the first one. Jesus reveals his purpose. Chapter 8, verse 31. This is what we know as, Peter's great confession, which other gospels also have this, but we're not doing a comparison or, what's included, excluded. We just want to see how Mark is using these events in the life of Jesus for the purpose for which God wants him to use them. So verse 31 and 32, this is after Peter, answered and said, "You are the Christ," and he warned them to tell no one. Matthew adds a little bit more. Mark's, very succinct, to the point. "You're the Christ," Peter says. Matthew has a different purpose, and he gives us more. In the gates, Jesus would say, "Yeah, you are Peter, and upon this rock I shall build my church." Mark doesn't have that, okay? That's only in Matthew. You would have to ask, why does Matthew have that? So, 31 and 32. "And he began to teach them." This is what, you might need to ask the question, why does he just have this? "You are the Christ." That's all that he says, Peter in Mark. "You are the Christ." And verse 31 says, "He began to teach them that the Son of Man, who is the Christ, must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again." And he was stating the matter what? Plainly. "And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning around and seeing his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, 'Get behind me, Satan, for you are not setting your mind on God's interests, but man's.'" This is a harsh rebuke against Peter. So, Jesus is stating the matter plainly. Now think of the audacity of Peter and what he did. He just confessed him as who? Christ. But the Christ that Peter has in mind is not subject to what Jesus just said. It doesn't fit his thinking about the anointed one, the Christ. Jesus states it plainly. No figures, no parables. Straight as an arrow. I'm going to, what does he say? I'm going to suffer. He must suffer. Rejected. Killed. Resurrected. What do we call that? That's the gospel, isn't it? All right. It's good news, but to Peter, it's not good news. This is, Peter wants to write a different scenario of things. And at every juncture, he tries to do that. No. Yeah, he went back fishing. So, get behind me, Satan. Satan means what? What's the meaning of the name? Adversary. One who speaks against. And he's revealed, in the book of Job, he presents himself with the angels of God, and God says, have you considered my servant Job? No one like him. Head and shoulders above everybody in his commitment to me and love for me. And the adversary says, yeah. He's never been put to a test of that. And so, give him to me, and he's not going to be what you think. See, he's speaking against the character of Job and also the character of God. So God stakes his character on the character of Job in the book of Job, which is interesting. But the adversary, to be personified as Satan, in which Jesus referred to him as, is really a rebuke of the harshest order. It's parallel to what Jesus, well, it's probably worse than what Jesus said to the Pharisees in Matthew 23. He used hypocrites there. He didn't call them Satan, though. He called them sons of the devil. But he called Peter Satan. In that state of mind, that understanding, that perception that Peter has of Jesus, he is, or he has positioned himself against Jesus. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. It's not that he's trying to himself be deceitful and lie and stuff like that. He believes these things. That's why it's so hard for these guys to be reconstituted toward the truth. Now, Jesus in chapter 8 and verse 34, here's his teaching on discipleship. And he summoned the crowd with his disciples and said to them, if anyone wishes to come after me, he must deny himself, take up his what? Cross, and follow me. There's a little allusion there to his death on a cross. Take up his cross and follow me. For whoever wishes to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel will save it. For what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? For what will a man give in exchange for his soul? For whoever is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will also be ashamed of him when he comes in the glory of his Father with his holy angels. Who is he saying this to? The apostles, the disciples, people that are crowd that's there. This is a pretty straightforward statement. And it comes off of the heels of him saying the Son of Man will suffer. He will be rejected. He will be killed. He will be raised. Jesus, don't talk like that. We have better plans for you. We have, you're going to do great things for God's kingdom and for Israel and all that. And then Jesus comes back and says, if anyone wishes to come after me, he must deny himself, take up his cross. Now, again, that's a re-emphasis of what he's just said that Peter hadn't gotten yet, or the other disciples, do you suppose they talked about the idea, Jesus is loony, man, he's losing it? What do you mean, deny ourselves and take up the cross? They knew what a cross was. They live in Roman society. So this is not fitting. It's kind of like how we can misunderstand somebody because they might say something because of our filters. We don't get it. You know, we just totally miss it and go into something else. Or we might be thinking of something else and we don't hear the other person talking because we're thinking about what we're going to respond to, what they already said earlier, and we're not listening to them. There's that kind of thing going on. How could they not get what Jesus has said? So, you have that first cycle, suffering and death. Peter rejects Jesus' words and rebukes him. And Jesus says, if you're going to follow me, you got to take up the cross and follow me. So, we go to chapter 9. And let's look at verse 31. From there they went out and began to go through Galilee, and he did not want anyone to know about it, for he was teaching his disciples and telling them. What's he telling them? The Son of Man is to be delivered into the hands of men. They will kill him, and when he has been killed, he will rise 3 days later. Second time he has reiterated this definition of Messiah. Okay? What does verse 32 say? They didn't understand. Kind of goes back to the statement that's made before that sight miracle. Do you not yet understand? They still do not understand. Okay? So, Jesus asked them about what they had been discussing when he was away. Okay, look at verse 33. They came to Capernaum, and when he was in his house, he began to question them. What were you discussing on the way? But they kept silent, for on the way they had discussed with one another which of them was the what. Now, how do you reconcile this discussion with even the first instruction he gave in the cycle? Anyone who wishes to follow me must do what? Okay, and here they're quiet, so they must understand something because they're sort of, I'd have to speculate as to why they're quiet. Are they embarrassed? The Lord caught them. What is it that they're quiet and not want to say anything? Yeah. Yeah, he didn't. The questions that are asked are for our own benefit, not God's. So, what were you discussing on the way? But they kept quiet, for on the way they had discussed with one another which of them was the greatest. Sitting down, he called the 12 and said to them, if anyone wants to be first, he shall be last of all, and what? Servant of all. Taking a child, he set him before him, and whoever receives one like this in my name receives me. So he has other statements. But think about what he just said. He teaches about discipleship. The first shall be last. What does that even mean? Sort of cryptic. The first shall be last. Yeah. What were the disciples just arguing? It's kind of interesting that, they're talking about who's going to be the greatest. And in arguing that, they are illustrating that they're not prepared for the kingdom. Yeah. Yeah. So all Israel, the rise of Israel, yeah. And they're going to be a part of the inner circle of this kingdom because Jesus is going to be on the throne, and there is 12. So, the first shall be last. Now, look at chapter 10. Now, there's so much here in the teachings whoever causes one of these little ones who believe to stumble, it would be better for him with a heavy millstone being hung around his neck. If your eye causes you to stumble, some of his harshest language to his disciples are here in this chapter, which is illustrating the seriousness of their ineptness in coming to an understanding of the kingdom and of the king. So hopefully the third cycle will be a little better, right? So we have verse 32 and 34 of chapter 10. We're not looking at the rich young ruler. All of this fits in, to that theme that we were looking at in the center section about the misunderstanding. Jesus is correcting false interpretations and presumptions about who Jesus is and what the kingdom is about. Now, verse 32, he begins again, stating the matter plainly. They were on the road going to Jerusalem, and Jesus was walking on ahead of them, and they were amazed, and those who followed were fearful. Think of these reactions now that we have. We got amazement, and we got those who are fearful. And again, he took the 12 aside and began to tell them what was going to happen to him. Jesus is very plain in all of these explanations. Behold. Now, here the word behold is used in his statement. The word behold is a term of imminency. That is, things are about to happen. This is about to come to fruition. It's imminent. That's the purpose of behold. It's either stressing right now behold the king, calling attention to one in association with something, an event or teaching. It has to do with the immediacy of the thing. And so here, the word behold is used. We are going to Jerusalem. And the Son of Man will be what? Delivered to the chief priests and the scribes, and they will condemn him to death and will hand him over to the Gentiles. They will mock him and spit on him and scourge him and kill him, and 3 days later he will rise again. Notice how specific Jesus gets here. But he also changes tense. Behold, we will go. This will happen. In other words, we're dealing with something that's just right around the corner in the future. It's imminent. Are you prepared? Are you ready for this? Well, let's see if they're ready for it, okay? James and John, the two sons of Zebedee, came up to Jesus saying, "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you." And he said to them, "Well, what do you want me to do for you?" They said to him, "Grant that we may sit one on your right hand and the other on your left in your glory." But Jesus said to them, "You do not know what you're asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink, or be baptized with the baptism with which I am baptized?" They said, "We are able." And Jesus said to them, "The cup that I drink, you shall drink, and you shall be baptized with the baptism with which I am baptized, but to sit on my right or my left, this is not mine to give, but is for those for whom it has been prepared." Hearing this, the 10 began to feel what? How did they respond to James and John? They didn't like it. We got a little problem among the 12, don't we? A little bickering going on. So they're the thing that's on their mind. And like Terry said, I think all of this is sincere on their part. It's revealing their desire to be with Christ and to be on his right hand, left hand side, places of honor and his glory. They believe that he's the Messiah. But see, they've got assumptions of what that means. And so, in their misunderstanding, as Jesus attempts to reorient them toward His way, they have a difficult time coming to that understanding. Okay, so look at the indignation with the other disciples, and Jesus says to them, here's His teaching, you know that those who are recognized as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great men exercise authority over them. But it is not this way among you, but whoever wishes to become great among you shall be your what? Servant. And whoever wishes to be first among you shall be your servant. For even the Son of Man, verse 44, and whoever wishes to be first among you shall be slave of all, for even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give His life a ransom for many. That's the last teaching that He gives to His disciples. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served. Now notice how this contrasts with how the disciples are thinking about kingdom. And rightly so. I mean, in every other historical event where a nation was conquered, a king arose and the people arose and they were victors and they gloried in that victory and reigned as supreme. Well, Israel was once like that too, till they were conquered, and then they would rise again, and so there is this political and this philosophical and theological ideas that are all converged with the assumption that Jesus is going to raise the nation of Israel and they're going to throw off the shackles of what? Their slavery. Or their being subservient to the Roman Empire. They'll be free as God's people again. And Jesus says the opposite, doesn't He? So what does He say? Now think about how the disciples must have reacted to this. Peter probably wanted to rebuke Him again, but he dare not. But there's no way that they're accepting this idea, because it goes against every strain of fiber in their body. He says, if you want to be great, you have to become the servant of all. That's just counter to the right hand, left hand, status, position, authority. And then you have the closing statement of Jesus, which sets up the last sight miracle, which closes this Act 2. So let's look at the sight miracle and notice how interesting it is when you read it in light of the first one. The first sight miracle took how many stages? 2. When the man looked, there were people walking about like trees. Okay, and then Jesus touched him again, and he could see clearly. Okay, Jesus has been touching, if you please, the disciples in this section. He's been working with their hearts and with their attitudes. Now we come to Bartimaeus, and we find out the key to why the disciples don't get it. Then they came to Jericho, and as he was leaving Jericho with his disciples and a large crowd, a blind beggar named Bartimaeus, when he heard that it was Jesus, the Nazarene, he began to cry out and said, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. Many were sternly telling him to be quiet, but the man kept crying out all the more, Son of David, have mercy on me. And Jesus stopped and said, call him here. So they called him, the blind man, saying, take courage, stand up, he's calling you. Throwing aside his cloak, he jumped up, came to Jesus, and answered him, saying, what do you want me to do for you? Now that's a good question. The blind man said, Rabbi, I want to see. And Jesus said to him, go, your faith has made you well. Immediately he regained his sight, began to what? Follow him on the road. That, my friends, is the symbol of discipleship. So, the clear thing is going to be seen in Act 3. It reverts back to the 3 times Jesus said what's going to happen to him. It happens. So, we'll make some more comments on this next time. My time's up. Thank you.